Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 16, Non-diatonic tonalities. Today, Lydian Sharp 2. Okay, Beau, we just had a heated 90-minute discussion on a whole number of things. And we got to tame ourselves sometimes, but this is what happens when we get good sleep. Me especially, too. But we've been toying with these ideas of tonalities that don't fit into the normal, what I like to call diatonic tonalities. I think that's a good term for it. I don't know if there's a specific term for it, but, there's the magic hexachord of Bela Bartok and other, pitch sets if you want to get into 20th century, right? Like, how do you keep track of 12th tone, dodecaphonic music or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, but tonalities, because dodecaphonic just shifts tonality so far and so quick, and the harmonic context kind of gets obscure, if nothing else. But it's a nice palette for exploring orchestrations and these other things. So there's a lot of validity to that, but let's not go there. And the other place we don't want to go there right now is like what we've covered, especially in our episodes on, tonal audiation or harmonic audiation, the typical essential functions we just covered in the diatonic tonalities like Dorian, Phrygian, etc. But you especially have been pushing your audiation and like complaining about what's wrong with these other tonalities. What's wrong with this tonality or that tonality, and we don't have names for them. This one you call Lydian with a sharp 2, and it's the new one for you, and you've been enjoying that. And I want to get into more generally. I want to hear that one, or I want the audience to hear that one, because I think it's really, really cool. It's totally cool. It's fresh, and we talked about the essential functions of it, and we spent this last hour, and that was like 15 minutes of this. We talked about all kinds of things, white supremacy.
Oh no! Okay, we're gonna edit that out.
No, I'm doing that to jolt you into this conversation, get you riled up a little bit. It's so cool. We're totally on the same page with that, by the way. What are these other tonalities, and share them with us, and talk to us about why they're stable to you, and why they work, and why we should consider them. Yeah.
I mean, so if we take a very MLT lens towards this, so we know the importance of listening vocabulary, we know the importance of making comparisons. Typically, the MLT content in curriculums is something like all the diatonic tonalities: Dorian, Ionian or major, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then we kind of use harmonic minor as its own tonality just because it's actually in the wild. So, but then the question becomes, there are other tonalities that they seem to pass any metric you could come up with for defending Dorian as a tonality. So, for example, I've been playing this Lydian sharp 2 thing. Can I play you a little bit of that? And then I'm going to defend why I think it's because in my mind, if you're going to say Lydian's a tonality, Lydian sharp 2 would be more of a tonality by any metric you could come up with. So I'll play you some of this, and I'll explain. And
it sounds familiar. So if anybody recognizes this sound in a movie or another composer or whatever, I don't have enough background in 20th century, harmony and tonalities to know whether this has already been covered somewhere.
There are people that have done this for sure. Like, there's lots of jazz musicians who have learned all the harmonic minor tonalities and all the melodic minor tonalities. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can.
Well, I don't know where to go get it.
Most people are calling these modes, right? Most people are going to call them. If you try to Google harmonic minor tonalities, nothing's going to come up. But if you Google harmonic minor modes, a lot will come up. Anyways, This is the one I've been playing. This is a little thing I've been playing for this Lydian sharp 2 thing. little rough, but it has these interesting functions that go behind it. And the reason
Will you do what I would do with new harmony or new tonality? Put it in a familiar context for me. So would you put it, just play Twinkle Twinkle? That way, can you do that? Or maybe the blues?
Let me put it in the blues form. So I'm gonna use the 1-4-5 from this Lydian sharp 2, and I'll just put it in a blues progression. So. The 4 chord on one of them, so I wanted to go back and get that. But usually the reason people will challenge these other things as being authentic tonalities like major or minor or Dorian or Lydian is that people often bring up like, well, what are the functions that go behind it? And that's often something I've had pushback from people, and you even mentioned this in a valid way. But the thing is, like, if you look at Lydian, like, how many useful functions are in regular Lydian?
3.
How many useful functions are in this thing? 1 is useful. The 2 is useful.
It's cool. Yeah.
The 3, whatever. The 4 is really interesting. The 5 is interesting. The 6 is valid. The 7 is valid.
So besides the essential functions, like almost all the other functions are like that second tier. It's like Dorian, you do the 1, the 4 is the most important. The 7 and the 5 are, you can use them. It's, you consider them on one of those in the first, or another one, or both of them in the second tier or whatever. But almost, other than those 4, the rest of the functions are not that powerful. Don't retain some characteristic that Dorian needs. This thing, there's like, because they're so equivalent beyond the first 2 functions, 3 functions, it's much richer in its harmonic vocabulary, I think.
Yeah, and that's what so Lydian has been a favorite tonality of mine, like, since I was a kid. And I was playing around with this a couple months ago, but then the past week or 2 I've really been hitting this harder. But the reason I now prefer Lydian sharp 2 over Lydian is just there's way more harmony that's available. I mean, you're changing, if you keep the same verbal associate system, so basically fa is the root, so in Lydian and Lydian sharp 2, we're talking about changing so to C. And so if you play the scale, it sounds very odd if you just play the scale regularly.
Which is,
you can kind of get a bluesy
first
sound
reason
out of
why
it.
Scales don't make near as much sense as like essential functions.
If you play the scale with the harmonies under, though, it makes sense. So instead of, if you add the harmony to it, you retain the sound of the tonality quite well. But if you ditch that, it starts sounding like something else. But anyways, this conversation is not to talk about Lydian sharp 2 specifically. It's to talk about there are other valid things going on out there beyond the 7 diatonic modes plus harmonic minor. There really are other sounds out there that are worth exploring. And then it brings up the question is, like, if we know these general tonalities have such a giant impact on people learning to audiate when they're younger, why are we not doing this kind of stuff with people
too, in addition
as well?
To.
In addition, yeah, never. I very rarely.
I might replace Lydian because, and Locrian I've already replaced with nothing. I've replaced that with the blues.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm doing additional tones on the essential functions, right? The te and the me that I use, and everybody uses in the blues.
Yeah, I mean, you got to make some practical decisions here at some point. I mean, no one's really playing in Locrian So, I mean, should you learn more
Well, it's
functions in major?
subjective. Your content is always subjective, whether you do, minor before major, major before minor, or, I would do Lydian 2, Lydian sharp 2 before, or I don't know where it would fit right now.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
It would, where it would fit? It would fit after I have a solid repertoire of listening vocabulary that incorporated only that.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
And I don't know where that is, other than on the microphone across from me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been sending Eric like messages over text with recordings of Lydian Sharp 2 grooves. You get weird sounds too. Like you can have a major and a minor third in one. So you can have a major chord with a minor third on top of it, which is very rare. You get. We've heard sounds like that in movies and stuff, and it's probably because these movie composers know about these modes or these tonalities. I mean, the only reason I mention modes here is like for the MLT audience, that's not the term we use, but the rest of the world is probably going to use that term. So if you start showing up and saying harmonic minor tonalities, I mean, people are not going to know what you're talking about. But a lot of jazz musicians know the harmonic minor modes, and then that's what they're talking about, the ones that are audiating.
Sure.
I don't just mean playing harmonic minor scales starting on different places on your instrument. I mean actually pinning the new resting tone down in your audiation.
Or playing specific scales over chords, which we talked about a lot. Like,
And the same thing goes with melodic minor. I mean, now we have a bunch of Lydian scales. Like if you know your tonalities in melodic minor and in harmonic minor, there's actually 3 different Lydian scales. There's the regular Lydian from diatonic, which you get this kind of... and the characteristic of that is so, and the chord that comes out. In this, you don't have so, you have C. And it's instantly recognizable. In the melodic minor, you get Lydian with a flat 7. And that also has a characteristic tone.
Right, that's your dominant sharp 4 chord, right?
Yep, exactly.
In jazz lingo, but you don't hear tonalities. You only hear about it in scales that go over stuff, like in the traditional jazz curriculum.
Yeah, typically in
they're
bebop,
theoretical. They're not something they audiate a resting tone for.
Yeah, that's the distinction. So typically Lydian with a flat 7 is audiated as a chord you can play on a dominant chord. So if you're going 2-5-1 in major, instead of playing the 5 chord, you switch it instead of what people will do is they'll go like this. And that's the Lydian.
So jazz musicians have that in their vocabulary, and they use it appropriately in their solos and in tunes.
But it's in the context of major.
It's always in the context of major
or minor
or minor, but this more likely major. But you don't ever hear it like where it is at end. Like the resting tone is that at the end and the beginning of the tune.
Yeah, so I'm talking about
make it simpler, like we do with Dorian tunes or Lydian tunes that we write typically for our early childhood classes or for any class to learn and get more listening and performing vocabulary on these tonalities. So this one though, it just strikes. It makes me smile. It really gives me. And if it doesn't, if you don't understand or hear it and audiate that resting tone, I suggest it's just because we haven't listened to it enough. But after a little while, I glommed onto it, and now I'm anxious to go create with it, and then put it in familiar, in familiar tunes for me, so that I get the vocabulary strengthened, and then once I can play the things, I'll be playing these with my babies. There's no reason not to, because it's just cool.
that's what gives it away. So for me, normally when I hear that sharp 4, Lydian lights up in my brain. But now with these other ones, I need more information to tell me, like just hearing this. Normally that would make me think Lydian, but now there's 3 kinds of Lydian. Am I thinking that sounds like Lydian sharp 2 to me now? Mm-hmm. But if I hear this other thing, that sounds like Lydian flat 7. So, I mean, all I'm advocating here is there's more distinctions that can be made. Just like you hear major better when you hear Lydian, you're going to hear Lydian better when you hear Lydian flat 7 and Lydian sharp 4. And it sounds, this isn't to overwhelm anyone. It's just like, once you've kind of gone through the diatonic tonalities, they sound so normal to you, like they can lose a bit of freshness, like you said. And these other sounds, they just like, they just sound fresh. I don't know how to describe it. They just sound new and like they're interesting. So, I mean, there's so many places this can go, and this gets into another conversation we want to have. Is like, if we don't have a lot of listening repertoire for this, right? Stuff. I mean, and so how do you teach yourself this stuff? And you got to do familiar patterns in familiar order until they get in your brain.
Do your little tonal pattern, what you did, and go up the scale, like how you taught yourself this.
So the way
I got me on the piano earlier.
Yeah. So the problem here is if you just play the scale, you're not going to actually hear the functions, right? And so what I started doing, I take the scale, like I was saying before, and I just recorded something on my iPhone where I went like this. Or sorry, I went like this. So it's a tonal pattern, but the notes on the top are part of the scale. Those are the first 2 notes of the scale. So I went, and I recorded that a few times. Then the next part I go. So now I'm covering the next 2. So the top melody is the scale, but I have the function under it. And then I keep going through the whole scale like that.
And then you do the first 2, right?
And then what I do, so I break it down small like that so you can actually handle it. And then I keep going in the recording, then I go like this. And I repeat that like 4 times. And I know it's not normally done the way MLT teachers deliver tonal patterns. Normally it's to do familiar
No, this is how you're teaching yourself.
Yeah.
But you're using Engelmann and you're using learning theory.
Yeah, because I mean, what happens is if I wanted to do a familiar pattern in familiar order like this, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, I could go up the whole thing and learn the pattern. But the problem is, I'm just gonna have to repeat that so many times before I really have that in my memory. So instead of doing that, I make 3 like this, sing it back. Sing it back. And then once I can do that while I just sing 1 pattern at a time, I just start doing 2 patterns at a time. And I always add 1 extra note just because I want to be landing somewhere. I don't want to go. I might as well go.
Yeah.
Because I want to train my ear to hear where it's landing. And I think that's something we're not doing enough when we teach tonal patterns, by the way. And that's a whole episode in and of itself. Once I can do it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, you could say that you're playing these tonal patterns in rhythm, but you're not trying to learn duple. You're not trying to learn data. You've already got that nailed. So you don't need to separate these things forever. And so this is collapsing some of the things we've talked about. It's like learning licks, adding the Engelmann, right? And we're talking about chaining things, which we're going to have a whole separate episode on. How Engelmann chains so that you can learn things. But right now we're focused on the tonality of it. But eventually all these things come together just like they do in any of the learning sequence.
Yeah, for sure. And when Eric mentioned so the Gordon thing here is like play functions as tonal patterns and sing them back. The Engelmann thing here is like Engelmann has and we're going to have a whole episode about this, on how to break things down into small enough pieces so you actually master it. So it's not a criticism. It's not an attack.
Quickly master.
Yeah, quickly. It's not an attack on how MLT teachers are doing it. But what I've noticed is that when I get to repeat, even though I'm trying to learn a familiar pattern in familiar order, which is the scale with all these tonal patterns underneath, when I first learn it, I get the chance to sing each one through. It's easier to master. And then after I do each one like that, I do sets of 2. After I do sets of 2, I do sets of 4. I skip 3 because it's not worth the time. Because once you can do 2, you're pretty much ready for 4. You don't have to do 3 at a time. But I'd like to hear Eric's feedback. So a couple months ago, I was working on Lydian Sharp 2. But Eric, after 2 or 3 days of me singing this, does it seem like I'm audiating Lydian Sharp 2 better?
Oh yeah. No, it was theoretical before. There
was a little bit of stuff.
You had, for sure, you knew the resting tone, but I wasn't getting it. And I finally today, I said, now play the blues with that. Or, I had you play something that I could relate to familiarly, but you're only changing the one, the one thing. Changing
or you could go like this. You go
the tonality.
Here's Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Mary Had a Little Lamb, yeah.
So
and that's so cool for people. I think that makes sense to our audience quicker than the first thing you played, I bet.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so to start kids on this tonality, right? You need that listening vocabulary. So play these songs that they're already familiar with and playing with this new tonality and compare them to, normal and compare them to something else.
I'd also like to back up a second and explain why I chose to do the tonal patterns like this. And this is... Because basically I could have gone like this. I could have gone, and then the next one, and then the next one, but when they're
I'm not retaining the resting tone when you do that yet.
Yeah, and there's another issue here where those tonal patterns like that, when it's like. They're not going to necessarily help your mind make intuitive audiation-based choices on how to make melodies, right? So when the tonal patterns are linked next to each other by just like a step in the scale, or this is a bad example because that doesn't normally sound like a step to people, but it is in this. So if I go. What ends up happening is when you have this one chord, I now hear it going to this da 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 da, and this is why I'm a big fan of learning tonal patterns in I don't know how you want to say this, but that are voice led, not things that always start from the root, right?
Yes.
And in the defense of MLT teachers, I mean, Andy's tonal patterns, and it sounds like the jump right in tonal patterns.
And a lot of them are. Yep.
They are like that, and I think
do mi do re ti re do so do re ti. That it totally makes sense in terms of a line.
Or Andy's are bum 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 bum.
Yeah.
And I think the reason we need to do tonal patterns like that is that when we learn tonal patterns, you think that you're learning just the function you're singing, but what you're actually learning when you learn familiar pattern and familiar order. Like when we go from 1 to 5, you're learning a way to get from 1 to 5, right?
Yes.
And I think we need to be more conscious of putting tonal patterns in orders that strategically cover changes that are common.
And then add a melodic pattern, like what you're doing now, versus just a tonal pattern without the rhythm, but add a melodic pattern to give you another bridge to go from one function to the next function, because that's just going to add to your creativity, add to your understanding of non-harmonic tones, not, without talking about them, just that here's a line that goes well over those functions. Yeah,
so if you just improvise melodically, how do you know what harmony to put over it? And if you do what I'm saying with the tonal patterns, you just intuitively know. Like when I sing, that sounds like what goes over that melody. Why? Because I've sang it like 40 times now. I mean, so there's a lot in here, but I mean, this is my plan for this year, is to drill these 14-ish new tonalities in my mind. And some of them I don't think are going to be as deep as this one is. But what's funny is
really pretty.
I did not intend for this one to capture my attention so much. I drew up a list of harmonic minor tonalities, like theoretically, and then just started, trying to teach them to myself. But this Lydian sharp 2, I was like, oh, I'll do it and we'll see where it goes. But I'm not expecting much. But this one has captured my attention more than almost all of them, except I really like the Dorian sharp 4 scale, and I'm not equipped enough to do
that one. But what are some others? What are some others? I had a student. So I always teach resting tone X. So that once they're understanding and into verbal association, that the children can say resting tone do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti without knowing any of the tonalities. So like, would you want to hear Mary Had a Little Lamb? What resting tone would you like me to play it in? And and they usually say do or la, because we've learned that without learning major minor yet. But that gave them access to saying resting tone T, or because they knew I didn't like it, and they get a giggle out of me not liking Locrian. But they always asked me to do it, and I play Twinkle and Locrian, and they recognize it now, right? And so, and that's great. And then they'd say, what resting tone? And some of the smart kids, like, hey, let's find out what this one is, instead of picking one that they know. Let's find out what fa is, or like that. And one time I asked this question, and this girl, Dahlia, in my class several years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, she said, I want resting tone C.
Exactly. Like S-I.
And I said, resting tone C, like the letter ABC? She says, no, resting tone C. And it took me a minute, like, oh, you've been doing the homework, obviously, la, do, la, ti, si, ti, la, do, mi, right? C, that's C? And she says, yes. And so I started playing around in resting tone C right there in front of her, and I did, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, resting tone C, and it's like Lydian, Locrian, right?
It's Locrian-ish.
It's totally Locrian, but it's, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. Let me turn this up. So it's Locrian with a flat 5. Sorry, I don't even know if you can hear that. And I haven't played this in forever because I haven't. Can you do that better than me? See?
I can do it. Yeah, I can do this one. So when I'm first learning these, I just try to hammer the resting tone into my brain, right? So that's not in my ear yet. That's a familiar sound, actually.
Yeah, it sounds Middle Eastern, little Middle Eastern, Turkey maybe, or whatever.
I think the key, though, to getting this
Persian,
stuff in your ear,
let's say Persian.
You need, if you're gonna make your own, like if you're gonna explore doing this on your own, like you're trying to go from theory into, because basically what we're talking about is relearn all the tonalities with C in them, right? So normally we only do minor with C, but I'm talking about. Yeah, so change so to C and just do everything all over again. But and then you do it again with
which ones are good? Have you found one?
You do it with melodic minor, and you change C and Phi, and you do it all over again. But the problem here, and this is the same problem we have with teaching tonalities to younger kids, you need familiar songs and you need familiar patterns in familiar order. So the idea that I got from Engelman is like, well, if these are fragile tonalities in your mind, what you got to do is you got to record stuff and sing it back.
Yeah.
Songs and patterns.
And even once you've done that, there might be only one or two essential functions besides the tonic and the other one that's the opposite of that, whether it's subdominant or not the opposite, but the one that has tension around it.
Yeah, like what would this one be? This is your resting
So we
tone
call
C.
that. By the way, I've told Dahlia that I now recognize that tonality as Dahlian.
Dahlia?
Dahlian.
Dahlian. Okay, so here's a Dahlian chord progression. But But see, the thing is, if you just improvise randomly once a week, this stuff is not likely to stick in your brain. You got to record something and go for a walk and sing it back every week. Sing the same damn patterns back over and over again, and eventually it'll just start getting in your ear.
Totally. You can't do it by what I do, because I can't rely away from the keyboard well. All this teaching, and I part of my problem is just a confidence in my voice. I think it's just I'm so ashamed of my voice or something.
It's okay. We're not singers. It's fine.
But yeah, it's like after teaching this much MLT, it's like I should sing better than that. But my aptitude or my confidence or whatever. But that you need to be able to audiate away from any help, like audiate away from a piano, audiate away from the teacher singing with you, like we do in the teaching mode of doing
exactly.
Right, or audiating, play the function while you're singing the pattern, and eventually, sing the pattern without any help, sing it in solo, right, and then sing a number of patterns in solo in a row, and then a melody that goes over that, 1-5-1 or whatever it is. That listening vocabulary and that performing, this is what I was talking about, performing vocabulary of just, at least 4 or 5 songs, right? And some of them can be familiar songs in unfamiliar tonality, which I find really helpful.
I think that's such a good but practical way to do this without overwhelming yourself is like find the 3 essential functions, and there might not actually be a 5 and a 4 chord.
This tonality has all but maybe one of the functions really works. That's what's cool about this Lydian sharp 4, why we're focusing on that. But these other things that Beau suggested we do is, take that sharp 2, take so and move it to C.
Yep.
And then do all your diatonic tonalities with just avoid so. And you
do the same thing. I mean, melodic minor tone. Normally, people think of melodic minor as this like literally a melodic thing that you do when you're playing minor scale runs. But I mean actually a minor scale with F and C all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And
no fa, no so ever. Yep.
I'm still hearing C as the resting tone now.
Yep.
But anyways, so recording yourself is a great technique for doing this, because I'm at the point where I can theoretically figure out, okay, I want to learn all the tonalities with C as the resting tone. I know the normal ones, so now I just gotta kind of get stuff in my brain. But I still don't want to be doing it only with an instrument, because it's going to be fragile. It's going to be flimsy. I want to record something and then sing it. And that's the value.
And you'll only have access to it when you have the instrument on you, or a tactile audiation, which we should talk to more about at some point later, because I like that, combining the, that somatic nerve integration with audiation.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why guitar works specifically well with movable do with a law bass minor. Because on the piano, when you use movable do with law bass minor, D major actually looks different on the keyboard than F major, even if you know where do is. But on the guitar, if I say do's here, and then I say do's here now, the thing looks the damn same. It looks exactly the same. It's
Your
like
fingers are the same. Everything's the same.
Yeah, but it's almost to the point where, like, I wonder if a lot of good guitar players who don't use movable do with a law bass minor are getting some of the benefits just because the guitar has movable do with a law bass minor, like kind of visually wired into it already.
All right, can I address the overwhelm a little bit?
For sure.
So, major, minor, Dorian, Mixolydian. Those were getting to Dorian mix. I was having a hard time in graduate school singing in minor, in tune. I learned by doing the tonal patterns in the car. I had this, it was a tape player. I had the tape running in the car, and I sang those dang rhythm patterns and tonal patterns every day on the way to work and on the way back. And after maybe 6 months or a year of the same ones I finally could trust myself to sing in minor in tune if I'm, being confident. It took me a long while, right?
Sounds
That's
like I
how
need
bad
a
I
bachelor
was.
degree.
And I feel like I could do it on my trumpet way easier, and it was just the ear to, or brain to voice, or ear to voice brain connection that wasn't connected because I hadn't been ever taught to sing in tune until
for sure.
Gordon suggested that all of us instrumentalists were just deciphering, the fly shit on the page. And that's what I was. I was like that until I got it into my ear, and then I would play, from recall with the crutch of having, the notation. So, but I was going to say, like, after I got Dorian and Mixolydian under my system a little bit, on the second tape or whatever it was, the third tape, and I have all of Gordon's cassette tapes for all of his harmonic and all his tonal patterns. He sold it to me after class at some point. He's just getting rid of them because cassette tapes were out of fashion by that point. And I was 10, I was a Luddite, 10 years behind, the new technology of CD, right? But that Phrygian and Lydian and Aeolian, they were so much easier after I had those four. And I think this is just another extension. It goes quickly compared to those. It's not like you're going to have to do the same amount of work to learn those first four or five tonalities that you're going to use for the next ones, because your audiation is so much, that it already has a bedrock or a foundation of major minor so strongly, especially if you're doing essential functions, not just tonal patterns, but essential functions harmonically, which, always referencing
and
my
you have
harmonic
comparisons,
sequence.
right?
But you've got those comparisons, and the more comparisons you got, the easier it is to learn later. So I want to, play around, find some, make some tunes, send them to us, and we'll make a vocabulary of your favorites, a listening vocabulary of your favorites.
Yeah,
And
I
we'll
mean,
go
I'd like
there.
to just compose acculturation tunes for this stuff, basically.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's it.
If you got
But
an extra
the
$100
comparison
a day.
is the way in. I mean, just like how we help students understand Dorian better by comparing it to Mixolydian and Aeolian and minor, you do this. I mean, that's why this stuff is not actually that difficult to audio, because if you keep playing Lydian next to Lydian sharp 2, I mean, it's just like, which one's Lydian, guys? Or, I mean, I'm pretty sure Eric knew the answer to that one. The Lydian sharp 2 one, it just stands out so much because it's like, it's not the same.
Same, not same, right? It's all goes back into everything Gordon taught us from, how do you measure a specific kind of audiation, which was his music aptitude measure, which gave rise to the term audiation, which gave rise to everything else that came out of music learning theory.
There's another cool one we didn't talk about, and I haven't worked with this yet. Like, I'm only trying to learn Lydian sharp 2. I'm just learning one a week for now. Like, for a couple weeks, I'm just going to stay on this one, and then I'll sprinkle another one in. I'm not trying to do like all of these every day. It's too much in terms of the overwhelm.
Oh no, you got to chain it. You got to do this Engelmann thing, and we'll get more into that more specifically.
But just like how you don't like, you have listening vocabulary, and this is the difference. I don't have a lot of listening vocabulary for this stuff to just listen to without creating myself. But just like how you only introduce like a couple tonalities here and there, you're not all of a sudden slamming people with like verbal associates for Dorian, Mixolydian, Phrygian. It's the same thing with this. I'm handling one at a time, getting it in there. I still theoretically improvise with the other ones. Like right now, I can do all of these theoretically, but I want to do this in the same way that we do all this other stuff.
Yep.
But it's an interesting conversation. I mean, if anyone,
it's so cool to give you to teach yourself these things so that you can then teach the children. So that's one thing we're talking about here. But once you've got some listening vocabulary and some performing vocabulary for the children to absorb this stuff, there's never anything wrong with giving them something that's quirky, to say the least. So it's way outside of our normal palette.
And there's no reason to think that these are inherently harder than the other ones. So, for example, I would almost venture to guarantee, but we would have to study it. I bet you Lydian sharp 2 is easier to audiate than Locrian. And so it might actually be defensible to teach that before you teach Locrian.
I like it, and I don't like Locrian, just because I don't have any tunes that I particularly enjoy yet. So
Yeah, so they're just because they're not diatonic. I mean, and I don't think we should call them unusual tonalities because it just doesn't.
Well, yeah, that's the same thing as unusual meters. We now call them. Well, I call them even more specifically. I don't call them uneven meters. I call them, big beats are not the same size, which is exactly what they are. So this is, our foray into this new possible content, right?
Yeah, it's new content. And if there's teachers that are interested in getting a more detailed picture of how I'm at this, I described it a little bit on the podcast, but send me an email or we can have a conversation about it. Just because I love this stuff, it's fun.
We know you're out there.
Yeah. So we have our emails in the show notes, or if you have questions about this, if what we just said sounds like German to you, let us know. Assuming you don't speak German.
Nein.
Yeah.
No, that's all I know in German.
I think that's a good place to end it.
That's very good. That gives me a lot to think about. All right, thank you. Hope to see you next time.
Okay, take care.